Hello, thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Georgina Nelson, and I am founder and CEO of TruRating. So I thought before we dive into a bit more of a discussion, I would start off in taking a step back and really looking at the last decade of retail since I've been involved with TruRating. And it's been some pretty interesting times, as I'm sure you'd all agree. We had the pandemic and then geopolitical uncertainty. Again, we're in another tranche of that at the moment. But I'd argue that the most exciting era is really this whole new world of AI. And with that comes a whole new set of expectations, which I'm sure every leader is faced with. Yeah, expectations of efficiency and faster growth, lower costs. But ultimately, what we're noticing is these strategies of incorporating AI efficiencies look incredible at the boardroom. But they really start to get implemented across large enterprises, that's where the cracks show. And in retail, like no other, execution is still mostly human. And we are fallible. And so I find the gaps in execution in this new world and era is particularly interesting. And it's where TruRating plays. So for those of you who might not know us, we ultimately hear from about 88% of customers in store. And that's because we ask a very simple question, rotated from the set, when customers check out. We integrate to the payments terminal. So every question we ask suddenly has a financial lens. Were you greeted in store today? Could you find everything you're looking for? And how much is that impacting what you spend and how often you return? And ultimately, we see gaps of about 50% between the top performing stores and the bottom performing stores. And it's really very much of how can we close that gap in execution, get better performing staff and teams, and really be on that path to growth, which we know our retail partners can be. So we're going to be diving more into that world of retail performance and AI, and I couldn't be happier to welcome my guest for today, Simon Hay. So those of you may know, Simon has been 40 years in the midst of consumer retail data. He was the first employee of Clive and Edwina at dunnhumby. I had 40 years ago. And since then, he then founded dunnhumbyUSA and obviously on that huge march with Kroger and then became global CEO. And in his most recent chapter, he is chair of Cinerise, which is a rapidly scaling retail data AI company. So hugely relevant to today's conversation. And thank you, Simon, for joining us.
Well, pleasure, Georgina. Thanks for having me, and congratulations on what you guys are doing with TruRating. I think the type of data you're collecting, the way that you're doing it, is incredibly relevant to this AI world. So I'm sure we can explore a bit more about that.
Looking forward to it. So, Simon, looking back on these 40 years, you've obviously seen a fair few retail phases and cycles. Which do you think has been the most disruptive, and what do you think about where we are now?
I think just listening to your introduction, Georgina, it made me think about, I can't remember who coined the phrase perma-crisis, but when you look back over the years, there are just so many of these paradigm shifts, whether it's the dot-com era, COVID you mentioned, geopolitical change, the rise of China, supply chains, the global financial crisis. There are just so many things, and obviously they put pressure on the resilience of economies and retailers and everything else. So to some degree, there's what can you actually control, what you cannot control. And of course, you can control the execution of your business strategy. And again, we'll talk more about that. I think what you're saying around AI today is probably seismic, in a true sense, as in it's a logarithmic scale, just because of its ability to change so many things at once, not only for businesses, but also for consumers, the ability to do complex mathematics, to write code, to simplify the rubbish way which most organizations communicate and connect and email and write proposals and all those types of things at incredible speed. And then, of course, you put that alongside the forthcoming wave of quantum computing, of robotics, of what's happening in sort of biotechnology and gene editing. There is just so much that's coming around, empowered by data and technology. And yeah, finding your way through all of that is pretty complex at the best of times, let alone in complex times like we live in today.
Yeah. And and when you think about AI being adopted across retail, obviously huge benefits as you listed in terms of those efficiencies and whether it's, as you say, internal comms taking away a lot of the busy work. But what do you think of the risks? We're seeing, yeah, obviously the temptation is to dive all into these new technologies. But yeah, where are you seeing that decision go wrong? What do you think retailers should be aware of?
Well, I think you touched on this in the beginning, that the biggest challenge, when people ask me what's the biggest challenge with AI, my answer is always humans,
Mm,
because we are fallible in the way we make decisions, just as large language models can be sometimes too. Less so now, right, than they were, but we can't just assume that they're always correct in everything they do and how they go about things. I think we tend to look for human-shaped holes in organization, and in our work processes, in our patterns, where of course AI can work across really sort of multiple dimensions. So there aren't AI-sized holes in organizations or in work and processes. And therefore, you're going to need people to work together. You've got to break down barriers within an organization. So there's cultural challenges. So I think sometimes people have just been, boards put pressure on CEOs, CEOs put pressure on our organization. How do you adopt AI with speed? And you've really got to raise the whole capability of the organization if you're going to drive that kind of change. So it's complex, right? And if it's complex and it's across silos and it requires execution and technology, they're all the Achilles heels of many big organizations. I don't know if you can have multiple Achilles heels, but that might be sort of pushing the metaphor a bit far. But that's in essence what they are, right? And I think that's why organizations find it hard to execute. So where do you find particular pain points that aren't necessarily human shaped, but are process shaped, that AI can start to make a difference and really deliver on the returns? And also, to be blunt, I think it's easier to start an organization today because you don't have all of the legacy technology, the legacy processes, the legacy rewards, systems, everything, right? You can start afresh and build an AI from the scratch. So to reverse engineer, I think when Jim Collins did Good to Great, the challenge always was it's quite hard to go from great to good, or
yeah.
shrink your way to greatness, right? So how do you fire lots of your workforce and your process and simplify your processes? And by the way, I don't necessarily means you have to, because you certainly need to change the skill base of your people. But do that at the same time as delivering is pretty hard.
Yeah, I agree. I'd also, with your data hat on, I'm sure the issues of integrity of the data when organizations are applying AI on top of what they have, but often it's the phrase lipstick on a pig. Um, and the risks of, thinking that just because AI is directing it, then I should trust it. But actually, when you peel back the onion and realize it's built on shaky data, is that an issue which you're seeing or conscious of?
Well, look, I think data it's another one of those challenges. I mean, data has been the constancy of my 40 years. I was lucky enough to start working when data was sparse. I think the first data set back in my pre-dunnhumby days, which is where I met Edwina and Clive, the Dunn and the Humby. We talked about big data, and it was a data set that was like 130,000 rows by about 40 or 50 columns, and we called it big data because it was the limits of what computers could process and make sense of at the time. Now, of course, it's petabytes of data, but the beauty of at least of having worked with small amounts of data is you understand what that data is, where it comes from, what its latency is, what it's telling you, what it doesn't tell you. If you transform it or change it, what have you done to it? If you apply mathematics and algorithms, what are you doing to it? I think there's not too many advantages to getting older. That's a piece of advice for you, Georgina. But one of it is that you can, having sort of worked with the raw material of data, people who fly over the top.
Mm,
Sometimes you meet chief data officers now in some organizations that never really wrestled and wrangled and dealt with data at this atomic level, and I think it's very hard. It's like being a gardener who's never actually got their hands dirty in the soil. I think it's quite hard to do if you haven't really wrangled lots of data in different forms and different ways to understand what it is and why it matters. And of course, the fuel for AI, as you said, in your comments, if you get the fuel wrong, the AI is wrong, and then you start multiplying your problems from there.
mm. Yeah, and I guess it's also, we've talked a lot about agentic AI and how agents are moving into that whole commerce journey as well. But yeah, I've loved the lens you've put on it around really trying to, not forgetting that those emotional drivers that, really underneath it all, purchasing and engaging is that, is such a it's a dopamine hit for us all. And when we move to automation of systems and agents, are we really missing understanding that emotional driver of many of these behaviors?
Well, I think there's 2 points in there I'd probably pull out. I'll come back to the emotional one in a second. I think on the first one, it's a real threat. I think agents for retailers, and particularly in the world I know best, which is grocery retailing. If you ask ChatGPT to help you with your shopping list and to help you save money, help you eat healthier, it's pretty bloody good on what it recommends and how it recommends it. And of course, retailers allow these agents to become, shoppers agents and to do the shopping for you, then you're going to lose the connection with the customer.
Mm,
So that really means that you've got to get your first party data right now and get that organized. It means you've really got to listen to customers and understand customers. The type of work that you're doing, I think, is so important. If you start it now, you've got the base of understanding to work from and build from and to improve your execution. If you wait 2 years or 3 years, then and agents have started to take trade away from the stores, it's pretty hard to win it back. I think on the emotional piece, when I hear you talk about the business, and I know your heritage is in store operations and execution, and of course that's super important to world of retail, right? With thousands of stores, if you get it right everywhere or get it better everywhere, there's a massive difference on loyalty and sales and all of those good things. But your ability to ask the question at the moment of maximum importance at the checkout, the questionnaire, if I get asked how many cups of coffee did I eat or drink 4 days ago, you haven't got a hope in hell of remembering, was it one, was it two? I can't remember. Was I tired that day, up early? Did I have the extra one? So you've got the chance to ask a question, or not a chance, your technology asks the question at the moment of reality. It's done by a human, of course, which in a world of bots filling in surveys online or automatic email responses and all those things, surveys we never complete anyway. I think you said your 80+% responses at the time. And I think also your ability to ask questions about the emotions. Was the purchase the way that brands think around security, around innovation, around security, around rewards, those types of things. You can ask those questions as well as, were you greeted? Did you find? Did you buy? Why did you buy? Those types of things. So you've really got an amazingly powerful set of questions that are both rational and emotional, and that also connect shopper marketing for brands and brand marketing. So I think you've got a pretty interesting, or very, very interesting set of technologies and something very powerful there in what you're doing.
thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. I know that was a topic we were actually discussing yesterday, weren't we, Simon, around brand and shopper marketing. I guess obviously dunnhumby's roots have very much been in bridging that gap between suppliers and retailers and helping them collaborate for the best outcome with the shoppers. How has that relationship changed, and how do you think both can optimize working together and collaborating in this new world, especially when you think about, budgets to the likes of retail media, etc.
Yeah. Look, I think sometimes when I talk to brands, I feel a little bit guilty because dunnhumby was at the forefront, continues to be at the forefront of the monetization of insight and media, which sometimes is a pain point in the relationship between suppliers and retailers, and sometimes it's a moment of immense creation of value. And I tend to prefer the latter to the former. Saying that, retailers and suppliers have had boxing matches for years, right? They know how to get in the ring together and land punches to negotiate their way to the best possible outcome.
Mm.
But I think, as I say, when you use data and customer understanding and a common language between both the retailer and the supplier, so you're talking about the same thing, right? If you talk about the same thing, then you've got all sorts of new and different ways with all the levers you have between brands and retailers, whether it's promotion, whether it's price, whether it's about in-store display, whether it's about experiences, all those types of things. And of course, fueled again by things like TruRating data on execution and the emotions of customers. Then you have conversations about how you win together. Because ultimately, retailers want to sell more things to customers, and brands want to sell more of their products to those customers too. So there is definitely a triangle of win-win-win to be had there when you're using data together in the right way, whether that's in a media environment or in an insight environment.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's pretty crazy when you read around the investment in retail media that it's going to overtake TV spend in the next 5 years. But I still think there's a real struggle on really understanding return on investment in those environments, and just relying on sales, which we know that can be a particularly shaky metric. And I guess to that tension between CPG, retailer, and customer, as we're moving to customers, as you mentioned, grocery being, we can see in our data there's a lot more bed hopping than there was 5 years, even longer than that. People go to different retailers, different grocery customers for different items, and that old misnomer of being loyal to one brand is no longer. So what advice would you have in light of value shopping? How do you think brands can build loyalty in today's age?
Brands or retailers, I probably sort of
Oh
separate
yeah, I
the.
use them both interchangeably. With retailers.
Yeah, I've spent too long in those shark pools. I think for retail, look, on one hand, is an incredibly simple business. On the other hand, it's incredibly complex. And I think getting organizations to really focus on what matters to customers, it's so easy to say, it's so hard to do, just because of all of this complexity and noise and tools and systems and processes and players and technology and data and execution and operations and supply chain and AI and et cetera, et cetera. Let alone sort of buy in store, return in store, buy online, return in store, and the complexities you get in other parts of retail. So keeping it simple, keeping it consistent, I think is key. Building common languages so that again, this is the power of linking the transactional data to the understanding of why, the type of thing that you're doing. Because if you can get the boardroom, the executive, the merchandisers, suppliers, the operators, the store managers, talking about customers in the same way with the same degree of understanding, then you've got that common language to build. You go, okay, I understand. That's what you're trying to do. That's what you want me to do. That's how I can help execute. So I think the more that you can cut through that complexity to get to simplicity, which is super hard to do, and then do it consistently and execute it, as you said, because it all makes or breaks on whether you get it done or not, and whether the stores actually deliver. But if you can get those consistent pieces right, focused on the customer, then I think you've got a path to growth and true loyalty, as opposed to buying loyalty through promotions and the short-term activities, which is what most retailers tend to default to on a pretty regular basis.
Yeah, I was going to say that, that's often known as dunnhumby. A key part of dunnhumby's heritage is advising on pricing strategy and promotions, etc. What's your view on how that's evolved and yeah, and the future and the race to the bottom?
I don't know if it's a race to the bottom. Of course, it can be a race to the bottom if you want to make it so. Again,
Yeah.
it's through the intelligent use of data, and certainly, after 25 years at dunnhumby, I have to be careful I don't sort of become a sort of walking billboard for what they do. But they're still a pretty powerful, important, good organisation doing some great work. But they always look at it through the customer lens, right? So what really matters to customers? What are the products that you have to compete on to win the basket, to win the customer, to build loyalty? So you can't just invest everywhere as a retailer. You've got to pick and choose where and how to fight. So I think their tools and their principles are very well honed in that type of environment. Do what matters to customers and do it well, and that applies to in-store execution as it does to pricing as to promotions. The Just before we came on air, we were talking about. I mentioned about how retailers have driven me mad by some of their activities and inability to change. Promotions are still largely in that camp. The good old Einstein definition of insanity of doing the same thing and expecting different results. There are still trillions globally spent on promotions, of which a huge proportion have no impact on on actual customer behavior or indeed on customer loyalty. It's a sort of default expectation because we've done it before, because someone else is doing it, because we need to do it, because we have a budget for it, we'll do it.
Mm.
So again, more thoughtful allocation of those promotional dollars, and of course, the role of personalization in that is starting to change that a lot, right? So how do you develop or invest in customers in a much more personalized and relevant way? Which means broadcast promotions should become fewer, smaller budgets, but more focused on, what matters to customers overall.
I think what I'm hearing from you, Simon, is very much obviously what we preach at TruRating is the fact that these broad sweeping initiatives, the looking at the overarching, whether it's an NPS score, whether it's a global pricing strategy, ultimately it's actually we're you need to peel back the average and look at it on a granular level, whether it's how that pricing is resonating in a particular market, even a particular store for a particular customer set. And that's likewise what we see in terms of that gap in execution and that variability, which you see in the stores. So, from your side, when you think about, yeah, the aggregated view versus the granular approach, do you have a particular opinion on that?
I think as you said, you've got to get into the granular. You've got to get into the detail. You've got to actually understand the execution,
Yeah.
and it is the lure of bad data. So, one of my least favorite emails is the one I get from the delivery company saying, "How was our delivery today?" It's like, well, you did your job. You took a parcel that had my address on it, and you put it in my door. So congratulations. I'm not going to give you an NPS score or a recommendation or indeed a detailed set of feedback. And things like NPS can cover such a broad swathe of emotions. Hearing only from the customers who love you or the customers who hate you, and very few in between, very few data
Mm.
points. The fact that if it's collected away from the store and collected from the moment, I think psychologists say you get about a 40% degradation in data quality because of that. You get the whole gaming of the system, the idea that, I'm sure we've all had this experience with car dealerships, please give us a 10, otherwise my children will starve and won't be able to eat tonight. So please rate us a 10 when you get this survey. And by the way, my name's Steve, so remember that very clearly. So bad data versus good data is yeah. So how do you keep it simple? How do you focus on what matters? Understand the what and the why of the customers, ideally together, and the type of things that you're doing is super powerful.
Yeah. And I think in this world, we've been able to leverage AI to really make sense of that data. So, like what we're doing at TruRating. So, notifications can pop, trends can bubble up to the top. So, you don't actually have to put in the hours to make sense of it anymore. You can get AI to do that for you. So I think I always think to my dad's phrase of look after the pennies and the pounds will look after themselves. And I think it's about ensuring that you have the integrity of the data at that source and that ground level, and in that volume, and then ultimately employing these tools over the top of it to ensure that you get the guidance and can take the right action that you need. So I guess just as a final closing point, Simon, looking ahead with your years of advising retail boards on these types of strategies, what would you say for retailers to really focus and think on to ensure that they succeed and come out fighting at the top in the next few years?
Yeah, look, I think that's the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it? I'm a great fan of paradox, and therefore, how do you solve things that actually feel like they're competing? So my advice would be you've got to keep it simple and execute, but at the same time, dive into the world of complexity and difficulty to solve the challenges of AI. So you've got to be simple and consistent today, but also blow the doors off the future with your use of technology, data, and AI. And you've got to do those things together, right? You can't do one or the other. You've got to do both. And therefore, tools that are driven by data that help you understand the customer, we've been discussing, are super important. So I think that's a key. Keep it focused on the customer, execute for them. Simple, consistently measure it, understand it, minute by minute, second by second, store by store. All of those good things. I think there's a piece that we talked on earlier about organizing your first-party data and building your data assets now, because the rise of agents, working on behalf of shoppers, once the relationship is gone, you're not going to get it back, right? So you've got to make sure that you're absolutely brilliant in store today, and you're getting the data and the understanding in the right places to drive your decision making. And
Yeah.
I think there's a cultural piece around ways of working. RFPs that have been involved in, from requests for proposals from retailers, processes are a year or 15 months. It's like, you haven't got time, right? How are you going to make a decision? What are you going to make it on? Make that decision and move. I think when you sort of drop out of big organizations, I've spent more time in the last couple of years or so with scale ups and agile, fast AI data driven organizations. And then when you engage back into the corporate world, you just realize how slow and sclerotic they are. And you go, wow, this world is so driven by speed now and timeliness, that having all in meetings with 40 people or unclear objectives, unclear decision making, what you're out trying to achieve. You've got the technology opportunities available, put a test in place, measure it, make a decision, move forward. It's the old classic case of, the best decision is the right decision. The second best decision is the wrong decision. And the worst decision is no decision. And I think most organizations are making no decisions because of how slow they are to act. So that cultural piece of how you embrace and dive into all the types of things we've been talking about is probably my biggest encouragement. Move with purpose and speed. Keep it simple, but also dive into the data AI enabled world.
I would give a shout out to our customers, and just say I think in terms of understanding the impact of innovation, investment in the stores, it is with our technology that they can calculate the ROI and, do those quick test and learns and innovations and know, right, we can see that customers are spending more, they're coming back more frequently. So that test proved it out. Let's go all in and scale and execute. And I think it's fail fast, as we always say, and grow quick. And so, we're Big
Well,
shout out to all
you're right to you're
True.
right to defend your clients because they're
Yeah,
obviously
you're doing it right.
yeah, well, yeah, but there are people doing it right out there, right? But there are also lots of people who I think the biggest threat for anyone in life, and whether that's corporate or personal, is thinking you've got time, right? Time is the most precious gift of all, right? And being super focused on how you use it to best effect is really important. So you're right to make that call out, and there are definitely green shoots, but there's also lots of people who are still watching on the sidelines, which I don't think is a privilege that's going to work in this AI data crazy world.
Yeah, yeah. It's whether it's TruRating or other solution providers and who are working with other verticals, real time data is available now. And for businesses to still look at PDF PowerPoints talking about what their consumers were doing and thinking 6 months ago or buying 6 months ago, it's just fall into the graveyard. So anyway, Simon, it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us and hugely inspired and energized yeah, by everything you say and the vision which you have for where the retail and data world is going. So thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody who's taken the time to listen to us today. Feel free to hit Simon or I up on LinkedIn at any point if you'd like to continue the chat. Sorry, Simon, hope you don't mind, or have,
Fine.
have any further questions.
I might not promise real time responses, but I'll do my best.
And as to the point of my American sales team, they would also love me to mention that we currently are offering a money back guarantee on what I talked about, being able to measure that ROI of any initiative with a pilot with TruRating. If by 3 months in, if we haven't pointed out revenue opportunities for you, basically on gaps of execution, which really impact your bottom line, 3 times worth the value of our annual contract, you will get that money back. So there we go. There's my American saleswoman, and I feel very awkward. And so we're gonna wrap it up now. Thank you so much. Thank you, Simon.